These are the actions of a species unbound by law, driven solely by greed and the illusion of dominion, Errol declared, his voice slicing through the chamber like a blade. He stood tall at the center of the council hall, his dark, marble-like skin drinking in the harsh light. The golden scales on his shoulders and arms shimmered with each subtle movement, glinting like a silent warning of his authority. His sista are, an unmistakable display of contempt, was evident as his sharp, reptilian eyes scanned the room, locking onto any who dared meet his gaze. Every motion was deliberate, his clawed hands slicing toward the looping holograms above him, driving his point into the very core of the council. Errol didn't just command attention. He seized it, leaving no space for defiance. The holograms cycled in an unending loop, human ships ripping asteroids apart, colossal drills burrowing deep into rock, colonies sprouting like invasive weeds on barren moons. Pulsating red overlays bathed the projections, stark warnings of a creeping contagion, each symbolizing violations of neutral zones. Errol's clawed hands swept upward in a deliberate motion, allowing the images to amplify his unspoken accusations across the chamber. Murmurs rippled through the holographic forms of the assembled delegations, their reactions ranging from subtle tilts of curiosity to an ominous shared silence. In their insatiable pursuit of expansion, Errol continued, his voice steeped in disdain, humanity defile the sanctity of galactic law. Their arrogance is a disease, spreading rot through the balance we have fought so tirelessly to maintain. He paused, his dark, reptilian eyes scanning the room. I call for immediate military action to rectify this threat before it spreads further. A wave of unease swept through the chamber. The holographic delegations flickered slightly as murmurs rippled among them. In contrast, the physically present council members remained stoic, their gazes locked on the confrontation between Errol and Samuel Poirier, Chancellor of Earth. One or two beings dared to voice tentative concerns, but most remained silent, their gazes drawn back to the looping images above. Errol turned slightly, the calculated movement amplifying his presence. He towered above even the tallest projection, his shadow cutting a sharp line across the polished floor of the council. Ridiculous, came a steady, defiant voice from across the chamber. Samuel Poirier rose from his seat with deliberate calm. His silver hair was immaculate, his dark suit a stark contrast to the glaring projections above, his stance radiating unshakable confidence despite the odds. Poirier's gaze, sharp and piercing, locked onto Errol with unwavering confidence. This is nothing more than a desperate fabrication. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the holographic projectors. Errol's sista twitched, his golden scales shifting imperceptibly as his gaze settled on Poirier. The tension between them was palpable. These so-called proofs you have presented, Poirier continued, gesturing toward the holograms, are riddled with inconsistencies. The timestamps alone contradict galactic traffic records. And those coordinates you've marked as neutral zones? They've been uninhabited for decades. He paused, his voice hardening. This is a blatant attempt to manipulate this council. Mind your accusations, human, Errol interrupted, his voice low and venomous. You tread dangerously close to insulting this council and its principles. Poirier took a measured step forward, his hands clasped firmly behind his back. I'm insulting no one. I'm exposing the truth. The murmurs returned, louder this time as delegations turned their attention from Errol to Poirier. A few shifted in what seemed like approval, others remained statuesque, their alien faces unreadable. Errol's lips curled into a faint snarl. Your words are hollow. Humanity has always spoken of truth while its actions devour the galaxy. The Council will not stand idly by as your kind tramples our laws. Poirier's eyes narrowed. Humanity has upheld every treaty set forth by this Council, even as others have. With a gesture, Errol cut Poirier's voice off mid-sentence. The chamber's audio dampened around him, silencing his words in a calculated, humiliating display. A shocked silence enveloped the chamber. Some delegations turned their projections toward Errol, while others remained frozen, processing the sudden breach of protocol. Errol stepped forward, his voice slicing through the quiet. The session will continue without interruption. His tone left no room for dissent. Behind him, the damning projections cycled relentlessly, a silent accuser in the tense chamber. Poirier stood motionless, his hands brushing the edge of the polished console that had just severed his voice. Adjusting the lapels of his suit with deliberate precision, he turned without a word. Each step toward the exit carried an unspoken defiance, resonating in the charged atmosphere. At the edge of the chamber, a figure emerged from the shadows, its translucent form glowing faintly, a rhythm that pulsed like a heartbeat. Sathar moved with an unhurried grace, his presence otherworldly yet commanding. Leaning close to Errol, his whisper was low, melodic, and dangerous. "Congratulations," Sathar murmured, his light flickering briefly. "You just declared war on the wrong species." The faint chime of an alert broke the tense silence as Chancellor Samuel Poirier strode through the corridors outside the council chamber. Pulled a sleek PDA from his jacket, its interface glowing faintly against the dim light. Urgent notifications cascaded across the screen, each marked with the seal of the Colonial Emergency Network. His expression, already hardened from the humiliation in the council, darkened further as he swiped through the reports. Then the first video began to play. It was chaos. Grainy footage from a colony security drone showed civilians running through narrow corridors of metal shelters. Smoke filled the frame, masking the details, but the screams were unmistakable. In the distance, the recognizable shadow of a Thorn dreadnought loomed over the colony, its plasma cannons lighting up the horizon. Explosions ripped through the structures as the camera jolted violently. The feed ended abruptly, replaced by the cold, sterile silence of the next report. The second video was no better. A mining outpost on a barren moon, once peaceful, was now an inferno. Thorn infantry moved through the settlement, their towering forms mercilessly gunning down anyone who resisted. A child's cry pierced through the static before the camera feed cut to black. Poirier tightened his grip on the PDA, the edges of the device digging into his palm as he struggled to steady himself. The relentless cascade of reports only grew worse. Theta 7, Delta 4, Caliban Reach, all engulfed in flames, all under brutal assault. His jaw clenched as he strode through the docking bay, ignoring the salutes of nearby officers, his focus solely on reaching the shuttle waiting to return him to Unity, the human flagship station nearby. There, he could address the fleet with the full weight of his command. He had barely stepped onto the command deck of Unity when the terminal at his side chimed with an incoming transmission. The notification was urgent, its tone cutting through the controlled chaos of the flagship's operations. He straightened his suit, brushing away the creases from his rushed arrival, and accepted the call. The holographic figure of Admiral Ian Hossman flickered to life before him, his broad frame and stern expression radiating authority. Hossman wasted no time. His voice was sharp, unrelenting. "Chancellor," Hossman began without preamble, "we're receiving scattered reports of attacks across the colonies." "What the hell happened at the council?" Poirier's lips tightened into a grim line. The Thorn leader, Errol, presented fabricated evidence of humanity's so-called violations. Before I could refute him, they cut the transmission. It was a coordinated humiliation, Ian. And now, he gestured toward the console, this? Hossman's expression hardened further as he processed the information. "This wasn't just about silencing you. They're playing the long game, setting the stage for something bigger." "Exactly," Poirier said, his voice low but fierce. "This isn't diplomacy, Admiral. It's war. And you have full authorization to respond accordingly. Strike back with everything we've got." Hossman nodded, his tone firm. "I'll convene the fleet commanders immediately. We'll need to secure evacuation routes and protect what colonies we can." Poirier leaned closer, his gaze unflinching. "Ian, we cannot afford to look weak. Let them see what humanity is capable of when we are pushed." "Yes, Chancellor," Hossman replied, his voice like steel. The transmission ended, leaving Poirier alone with the quiet hum of the chamber, a silence that seemed to echo humanity's fragile position. Meanwhile, aboard the flagship Unity, Admiral Ian Hossman wasted no time. On the command deck, he turned to the tactical officer, his expression a mask of focused determination. Around him, the air buzzed with controlled urgency as crew members worked feverishly at their stations. Holographic maps projected in front of him displayed the colonies under attack, each marked with a pulsating red beacon that seemed to grow brighter with every second. "Lieutenant Rivera," Hossman said, his voice sharp and commanding. "Compile every fleet within range of the colonies. I want their captains on secure comms in 5 minutes. Inform them of the situation and send them the attack reports." Rivera nodded briskly, focusing intently as she worked the console with precision. "Yes, sir. I'll ensure the data is transmitted immediately." Hossman's focus locked onto the shifting holograms. Each glowing red marker felt like a blow to his core, but he pushed the weight of it aside. "Send the order. All available fleets are to mobilize and reinforce the colonies under attack. No hesitation. Tell them to move now." The command was executed within seconds, the crew springing into action as orders rippled through the chain of command. Across the holographic display, Blue markers representing human fleets began shifting, converging toward the colonies under siege. Hausman lingered for a moment as he observed the data feeds before stepping away. Above the colony of Theta 7, the sky burned crimson. Streaks of plasma lit the atmosphere, carving through the haze of smoke and ash that choked the settlement below. The colony's modest defensive system struggled to hold the line, their automated turrets firing in rapid bursts at the towering Thorn dreadnoughts descending from the sky. Above the colony of Theta 7, a Thorn dreadnought loomed in orbit. On the ground, the scene was pure chaos. Civilians rushed toward evacuation shuttles, the roar of engines barely masking the sound of collapsing buildings and incoming artillery fire. The sudden arrival of human reinforcements broke through the cacophony like a thunderclap. A dozen sleek warships emerged from hyperspace, their hulls shimmering as they powered up weapon systems mid-descent. The lead ship, the Spear, dove into the fray, its railguns tearing through the smaller Thorn vessels patrolling the atmosphere. The colony's defenders, battered and outnumbered, cheered as the reinforcements launched coordinated strikes that cut through the enemy lines. On board the Spear, Captain Darnell shouted orders. Concentrate fire on their orbital support. We need to break their line and give the colony breathing room. The ship's cannons roared, sending volley after volley into the Thorn dreadnought. Explosions rippled across its hull, the once imposing vessel listing as its shields failed. Meanwhile, human fighters darted through the chaos, engaging enemy craft and drawing their fire away from the evacuation zones below. Not far from Theta 7, in the isolated colony of Caliban's Reach, the situation was dire. A Thorn assault force had already breached the perimeter, their infantry moving methodically through the settlement's narrow corridors. Desperate messages from the colony's governor crackled through the emergency comms, their pleas for evacuation barely audible over the sound of gunfire. Governor Adabo, this is Lieutenant Commander Franson, came the response from a human strike force leader. We're inbound with transports. Hold your position as best you can. We'll extract your people. Franson's strike force approached the colony with calculated precision, using the rocky terrain to mask their movements. Their lead ship slipped fast through the terrain, avoiding the Thorn's orbital sensors. As the shuttles landed amidst the chaos, heavily armed Marines disembarked immediately, setting up defensive perimeters. Get the civilians on board now? Franson barked, his voice cutting through the din. His team's coordinated defense created a narrow but vital corridor for evacuees to reach the transports. Civilians, their faces streaked with fear and soot, clambered aboard the shuttles as the Marines held the line. Behind them, Thorn infantry pressed forward, their massive forms relentless. One Marine, pinned by enemy fire, shouted into his comms, "We're out of time, Commander. We need air support." Franson's eyes flicked to his tactical display. It's coming. Hold the line. Moments later, a human gunship roared overhead, unleashing a barrage of missiles that obliterated the advancing Thorn. The last shuttle took off just as the perimeter collapsed, the Marines retreating to their own ship under heavy fire. Back on the command deck, Admiral Ian Hausman stood with arms crossed, watching the live feeds from the colonies. The data streams were relentless. Casualty reports, evacuation numbers and enemy positions scrolled across the displays. Each loss weighed heavily, but the sight of successful extractions and coordinated strikes provided a small measure of solace. Lieutenant Rivera approached, her expression grim. "Admiral, we're receiving new reports. Multiple stations and outposts are under attack." Hausman's eyes narrowed. "By the Thorn?" he asked, his tone sharp. Rivera hesitated. "No, sir. These attacks are different. Coordinated strikes by the Vi. They're targeting stations and outposts simultaneously with the colony assaults." Hausman's shoulders squared as he studied the tactical display, the red markers multiplying across the map. He turned to Rivera, his voice firm and measured. "Send out an alert to the nearest fleets. Tell them to reinforce the stations and outposts under attack. Prioritize the most vulnerable locations and get them to hold their positions." "Yes, Admiral," Rivera replied before stepping away to relay the orders. Hausman's gaze remained fixed on the holograms as he spoke, his tone cold and resolute. "Send what reinforcements we can now and tell them to hold. We will end this soon." In the colonies and outposts, where smoke and desperation clung to the air, humanity fought tooth and nail to hold the line. Reinforcements from the fleet had begun to stabilize the most vulnerable positions, but the relief was temporary. Even as the crimson markers of Thorn dreadnoughts and Vi strike cruisers dimmed on tactical maps, new threats emerged, larger, deadlier and more numerous than before. On the outskirts of Theta 7, The human fleet had formed a defensive perimeter. Admiral Ian Hossman stood on the command deck, his eyes narrowing on the holographic display. It was a chaotic tangle of red and blue markers, the enemy forces vastly outnumbering humanity's defenses. But Hossman's focus remained steady. His command crew worked feverishly, relaying orders and coordinating responses. "Admiral," Lieutenant Rivera called from her station, her voice cutting through the tense hum of the bridge. "Enemy reinforcements detected. Thorn dreadnoughts and Vi cruisers are converging on sectors Theta and Delta. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes? Hossman's stance shifted subtly. He straightened, his voice calm and commanding. "Order all defensive positions to hold. Prioritize evacuation routes and civilian transports. Delay them at all costs." Rivera nodded, her hands a blur over the console. "Yes, sir." Across the colonies, human ships darted into position, their sleek forms dwarfed by the enemy's imposing dreadnoughts. Groundside, Marines and civilian volunteers worked side by side to fortify makeshift defenses. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but their resolve was unshakable. Each second they bought was another step closer to survival. Pandora's Box, an infiltrator-class vessel, glided silently through the void, its matte black hull absorbing the sparse light of distant stars, rendering it nearly invisible. On board, Captain Darius Ville and his crew studied the mission briefing one last time. The dim red light of the war room cast sharp shadows across his angular features. "This is a one-shot operation," Ville said, his voice steady but firm. His team, a blend of Marines and technical specialists, listened intently, their focus unshaken. Among them, Sergeant Kara Rowe, the lead cyber warfare officer, stood with her sharp eyes fixed on the holographic display of their target. She nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the plan. The target was a Thorn communication hub, a massive orbital station bristling with antennas and relay dishes. It was the nerve center for the enemy's fleet coordination in the sector. The plan was simple in theory but perilous in execution. Infiltrate the station, plant a specially designed virus in its core systems, and retreat before the enemy could respond. "Once we're in," Ville continued, "Rowe will deploy the package. We'll have no more than 10 minutes before the Thorn catch on, so we'll need to move fast." A murmur of agreement passed through the team. Ville's gaze swept over them, his tone softening just enough to carry reassurance. "You've all been chosen for this because you're the best. Let's get it done." Minutes later, Pandora's Box emerged from hyperspace on the outskirts of the Thorn-controlled system. The ship's advanced cloaking systems hummed to life as it approached the target. Inside, the team prepared for deployment. The ship docked silently with the Thorn station, its grappling arms latching onto an exposed maintenance airlock. The team disembarked swiftly, their movements rehearsed to perfection. The interior of the station was cold and dimly lit, the metallic walls adorned with Thorn glyphs that pulsed faintly with energy. Ville led the way, his weapon held low but ready, his steps muffled against the cold metallic floor. The team moved like shadows, each motion precise and rehearsed, slipping past patrols and bypassing security systems with Rowe's-calculated precision. The faint hum of alien machinery filled the air, an ever-present reminder of where they were and the danger that loomed. They reached the central control room without incident, an expansive chamber filled with towering consoles and holographic displays. Rowe approached the central console, deftly navigating the alien interface with practiced expertise. The virus, a marvel of human ingenuity, was designed to infiltrate the Thorn systems undetected, spreading chaos across their communication networks. She inserted the device, a sleek black module, and initiated the upload. "Package deploying," Rowe announced. 3 minutes to completion. The tension in the room was palpable as the team secured the perimeter. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, Thorn patrols closing in. Ville signaled for silence, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Contact," a Marine whispered, raising his rifle. "Hold fire," Ville ordered. "Let them pass." The Thorn patrol moved past the doorway, their guttural voices fading into the distance. Rowe exhaled softly, her focus unbroken as the virus completed its upload. "Done," she said, disconnecting the module. "We're good to go." Ville signaled to his team, and they moved swiftly through the dim corridors, retracing their path back to their ship. Each step was calculated, every shadow scrutinized as they avoided the patrols that had begun to stir. When they reached their airlock, Pandora's Box was waiting, its docking clamps ready to disengage. The team boarded quickly, the hiss of pressurization signaling their return to safety. As the ship pulled away from the Thorn station, cloaking systems humming to life, Ville activated his comms. This is Vil. The box is open. Admiral Hassman received the message, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Understood, Captain. Good job. He turned to Lieutenant Rivera, his voice firm. Begin Phase 2. Yes, Admiral, Rivera replied, her expression mirroring his faint smile as she leaned into her station to execute the command. Across the sector, the virus unleashed its chaos. Thorn dreadnoughts drifted erratically, their navigation systems caught in a web of phantom signals that pulled them off course. Vi strike cruisers faltered, their sleek formations splintering under conflicting orders. The once coordinated fleets now moved like disoriented predators, their strength undercut by confusion. Communication relays crackled with distorted transmissions, spreading chaos and disarray. Despite the chaos, the Thorn and Vi forces pressed their attacks. Their numerical advantage was staggering, and even disorganized they posed a formidable threat. Human forces fought valiantly to hold the line, their coordinated strikes and tactical ingenuity making up for their lack of numbers. On the ground, Marines and civilians worked together to repel wave after wave of enemy assaults. Makeshift barricades turned city streets into battlegrounds, each skirmish a desperate bid for survival. In orbit, human ships danced through the chaos, exploiting every opportunity to strike back. Admiral Hassman stood tall at the center of the command deck, his sharp eyes fixed on the tactical updates flickering across the holographic displays. The battle was far from over, but humanity had gained a crucial edge. The chaos was evident, but so were the patterns emerging within it. They're fragmented, Admiral Hassman said, his voice calm but decisive. This is our opening. Lieutenant Rivera, send orders to all battle groups. Launch coordinated strikes to reclaim lost positions. Prioritize evacuation zones and critical outposts. Rivera nodded. Orders sent, Admiral. Across the embattled colonies, humanity seized the opportunity. Ships broke from defensive perimeters, targeting isolated enemy vessels with surgical precision. In orbit around Theta 7, a squadron of human fighters darted between hulking Thorn warships, their maneuvers sharp and calculated. The lead pilot, Commander Hassan, barked orders into his comms. Squadron, focus fire on their engines. Ground teams need us to keep these bastards busy. The fighters darted through a storm of plasma fire, striking weak points with pinpoint accuracy. One Thorn destroyer erupted in a cascade of flames, its massive hull splitting as its core destabilized. Below, Marines and civilians cheered as the glow of the explosion lit up the smoke-filled sky. At Caliban's Reach, Lieutenant Commander Coolidge had returned to lead another evacuation effort. The settlement's narrow corridors, still scarred from the first assault, echoed with the desperate rush of civilians fleeing to waiting transports. Coolidge stood at the edge of the perimeter, his rifle braced as he directed his team. Keep the lanes clear. We don't leave anyone behind. His voice cut through the chaos as his Marines formed a tight wall of defense against the advancing Thorn infantry. The air crackled with gunfire and the deep guttural roars of the Thorn, but the Marines held their ground. Overhead, human dropships descended, their heavy cannons pounding the enemy lines. Coolidge signaled to his team, "Final wave. Move out." But the attack was far from over. Thorn reinforcements arrived with a vengeance. Dozens of ships emerged from hyperspace, their colossal silhouettes casting shadows over the embattled colonies. Among them, a command vessel bristling with weaponry loomed at the center of the fleet. Its captain, a Thorn warlord with jagged golden scales, barked orders to his crew, his guttural voice resonating through the bridge. Regroup the fleets. Smash their defenses and bring this sector under control. But the humans were ready. Hidden within the rugged shadows of the Delta System's asteroid belt, a contingent of human ships lay in silent ambush. Tracking the Thorn reinforcements' trajectory with meticulous precision, they waited like predators ready to strike. Hold your positions, Captain Serbala ordered, his voice low but firm. Wait for them to enter the kill zone. The Thorn ships moved into the system, their formation tightening as they advanced. They believed they were regrouping for a decisive strike, unaware of the human fleet lying silent in the shadows. When the first ships crossed the asteroid field's threshold, Serbala gave the command, "Engage." The asteroid belt lit up as concealed human vessels sprang to life, their railguns and missile batteries unleashing hell. The Thorn ships, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Explosions rippled through their formation as human firepower struck critical systems. The command vessel reeled as a barrage of railgun slugs pierced its hull, its golden glow dimming as its shields collapsed. Serbala's crew worked with mechanical precision, targeting weak points and isolating the Thorn ships one by one. The enemy's numerical advantage faltered as their confusion deepened. Yet even amidst the ambush, the Thorn refused to yield. They fought back with a ferocity that left several human ships damaged, forcing the fleet to reposition to avoid direct fire. "Captain, their flagship is trying to escape," a tactical officer reported. "Not today," Serbula replied. "All units focus fire on their engines. Don't let them regroup." As the human fleet closed in, the Thorn flagship erupted in a fiery explosion, its wreckage scattering across the battlefield. The remaining enemy vessels broke off, retreating into hyperspace to regroup. The ambush had bought precious time, but it came at a cost. Serbula's voice softened as he addressed his crew. "Good work, everyone. Let's get the survivors home." The reports flooded into Hassman's command station, each one painting a picture of hard-won victories and mounting sacrifices. The colonies had held, but barely. The virus had done its job, buying the time humanity needed to regroup. Now the counteroffensive could begin. "Admiral," Rivera said, stepping beside him. "The evac zones are clear and key positions are secure. But enemy reinforcements are on their way." Admiral Hassman's focus stayed locked on the holographic map. "Let them come," he said firmly. "It's time to end this." Hassman's gaze lingered on the vast expanse beyond the viewport. There, colossal fleets, an awe-inspiring force of towering silhouettes, emerged from the void, converging with his own fleet. He raised a hand, his tone calm yet commanding. "They'll get relief." Turning to the communications officer, he added, "Open a secure channel to all battle groups." The room fell silent as the order was carried out. The tactical display shifted, and then, at the far edge of the map, something changed. A new formation materialized, massive, powerful, and unmistakable. "Prepare for their arrival," Hassman said, his tone brimming with authority. "Bring them in." At the edge of the conflict, space itself tore open with a thunderous ripple. From the swirling void of hyperspace, the Medusa emerged, a titan of human engineering and the first of the Leviathan-class battleships. Its immense hull gleamed under the pale starlight, a monolith of power and defiance bristling with weaponry and protected by humanity's most advanced defenses. It was a fortress designed to dominate. The Medusa did not arrive alone. Dozens of smaller warships followed in its wake, forming a disciplined vanguard. Each vessel moved with precision, their sleek designs and cutting-edge systems a testament to humanity's ingenuity. The fleet spread out like an iron wave, their arrival a stark contrast to the battered, beleaguered ships already locked in the fight. On board the Medusa, Admiral Ezra Zephaniah stood on the command deck, exuding an unshakable presence. Around him, his crew moved with clockwork efficiency, their faces marked by determination. The tactical map before him displayed the chaos of battle in unrelenting detail. "Status report," Zephaniah ordered. "Enemy forces remain concentrated around the colonies," his XO replied. "They're heavily fortified, but their formations are fractured. They haven't detected us yet." Zephaniah's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good. Let's make an impression." The Medusa surged forward, its engines emitting a low, thunderous growl. Flanking ships moved in perfect synchronization, their weapon systems charging in unison. Across the tactical map, human forces began to shift, retreating slightly to fall in line with the Leviathan fleet. The impact was immediate. The Medusa's main cannon roared to life, unleashing a searing beam of energy that sliced through space with merciless precision. Its impact shattered a Thorn dreadnought in a cascade of destruction. The beam cleaved through its shields and hull, leaving the massive ship to erupt in a fiery explosion. Smaller human ships followed suit, targeting vulnerable enemy vessels with deadly precision. Railguns roared, missile salvos streaked through the void, and the sky burned with the light of the assault. The Thorn and Vi forces, caught off guard by the sudden arrival of the Leviathan fleet, faltered. Their already fractured formations broke further as panic spread among their ranks. On the ground, Marines and civilians paused in their frantic defenses to watch the sky. The sight of the Medusa and its fleet obliterating the enemy brought a surge of hope. Cheers erupted across the colonies as human forces rallied, pushing back against the disoriented Thorn attackers. In orbit, Admiral Zephaniah issued precise orders, his voice steady amidst the chaos. "Focus on their command ships. Break their chain of command completely and keep the Medusa moving. Don't give them a stationary target." Inside the Thorn command vessel, chaos reigned. The warlord snarled orders, his golden scales glinting under the dim light. "Regroup the fleets. Counterattack. Do not let them." His words were cut short as a shockwave rippled through the ship, throwing the crew into disarray. The Medusa's firepower had breached the vessel's defenses, and its systems were failing. Alarms blared, the ship's interior shaking as explosions tore through its hull. The warlord bared his teeth, his rage boiling over, but it was futile. His command ship disintegrated in a blinding burst of fire and debris. On the Medusa, the crew erupted into cheers as the Thorn command ship was destroyed. Zephaniah allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction before turning to the comms officer. "Patch me through to the fleet." A moment later, his voice echoed across the comm channels. "This is Admiral Zephaniah. The enemy's command structure is in shambles. Press the advantage. No mercy." The Leviathan fleet pushed forward, their assault relentless. One by one, the remaining Thorn and Vi ships were obliterated or forced into retreat. The tide had turned, and the enemy's once overwhelming presence was reduced to scattered remnants fleeing into the void. Admiral Hassman watched the tactical display as the markers of enemy ships blinked out one after another. The battle was over. His crew exchanged smiles and nods, but the admiral remained composed. He stepped forward, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "Open a channel to Errol," he ordered. The comms officer hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. Moments later, the holographic image of the Thorn leader appeared. Errol's expression was twisted with rage and desperation, his golden scales dulled. Hassman's gaze was cold, his words deliberate. "You wanted war, Errol. You have it. And now we're coming for Almaris." The transmission ended abruptly. Errol stood frozen, his sharp claws gripping the edges of his command console. He turned sharply to his crew, his voice a guttural roar as he issued frantic orders. But deep down he knew the war had shifted, and humanity was no longer the prey. Admiral Hassman's sharp growl filled the command deck. "Order all forces to retreat to Almaris. They must not reach our system." At the same time, Hassman turned to Rivera, his expression determined. "Send the next Leviathan." At the edge of the Sigma system, the void itself seemed to shatter as a second rupture tore through the darkness. From the blinding chaos of hyperspace emerged the Dauntless, the second of the Leviathan-class battleships. Its angular hull, a monument to human defiance, exuded menace, every inch designed for war. A mobile fortress bristling with advanced weaponry, shield emitters, and the scars of countless battles already endured. Behind it followed a contingent of warships, carriers, destroyers, and smaller attack craft, their engines glowing faintly in the void. The fleet had been assembled for one purpose: to retake the stations and outposts that had fallen under Thorn and Vi control and eliminate all their menace over the sector, restoring human dominance over these critical positions. On board the Dauntless, Admiral Vol Kalen stood at the center of the command deck, a towering figure with a square jaw and piercing gaze. Kalen had earned his reputation as a tactician who thrived under pressure. Around him, the hum of activity was relentless, officers relaying orders and status reports with practiced efficiency. "Status?" Kalen asked, his voice sharp but controlled. His XO, Commander Jansen, gestured to the tactical display. "Thorn and Vi forces remain entrenched around the stations. Their positions are fortified, but they haven't detected us yet. We're reading multiple troop transports and supply ships among their ranks." Kalen studied the map, his expression unreadable. "Good. If we hit them fast, they won't have time to regroup. Begin the approach." The first salvo came without warning. The Dauntless unleashed its main cannon, a railgun of unprecedented power. Its projectile tore through space faster than the eye could follow. It struck a Vi command ship, the impact splitting the vessel in two as fire and debris spilled into the void. Before the enemy could react, the supporting human ships opened fire, their coordinated assault overwhelming the outer defenses. Inside one of the besieged stations, Lieutenant Isla Manuelos, a veteran Marine and one of the few humans left behind during the initial Thorn assault, watched the carnage unfold from a viewport. The Dauntless filled the sky like a colossus, its weaponry pounding the enemy ships with ruthless precision. "Lieutenant," one of her Marines called, breaking her trance. Orders from the fleet were to secure the station's core and prepare for extraction. Manuelos nodded sharply. "You heard him. Move out." The Marines swept through the station with practiced precision, retaking one sector after another. Manuelos led from the front, her rifle snapping off precise shots as they pushed deeper into Thorn-occupied areas. The arrival of the Dauntless shifted the balance of power, and the enemy knew it. Meanwhile, as the Vi fleet began to reorganize in preparation for their retreat to Almaris, an urgent distress signal blared through their comms. The captain of the Vi flagship, a towering insectoid figure with shimmering carapace wings, jerked upright, its mandibles clicking nervously. The message was clear, frantic, and crackling with static, but unmistakable in its urgency. This is a priority alert from Kilua. Human fleets have entered the home system. Repeat, human fleets are in the system. Defensive positions are overwhelmed. For a moment, silence hung heavy on the bridge, the crew exchanging uneasy glances. The captain's wings flared as it barked orders. Verify the source. Quickly. The tactical officer hesitated, its claws striking the controls with rapid precision. It matches Kilua's communication protocols, the officer stammered, and it's coming directly from the planetary defense grid. The captain's mandibles clicked rapidly in thought, its gaze flicking to the tactical map. We cannot abandon the homeland, it finally growled. Signal the fleet. Return to Kilua immediately. Protect the planet at all costs. One by one, Vi ships began to break formation, their engines flaring as they jumped to hyperspace. The Thorn forces, watching their allies abandon them, hesitated. Without the Vi's support, their position was untenable, but orders from Errol had already made their choice clear. Retreat to Almaris, came the final command from the Thorn flagship. Do not engage further. Across the battlefield, Thorn ships turned tail and fled, their engines blazing as they followed the Vi into the void. Admiral Kalen watched the scene unfold from the Dauntless. On the tactical map, the red markers of enemy ships began to blink out as they retreated. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Good. Let them run. They'll find no haven where we're going. Admiral Kalen's faint smirk grew as he turned to his XO. They took the bait. Signal all ships to pursue the stragglers but don't overextend. Focus on reclaiming the stations and securing our people. Yes, Admiral, Jansen replied, moving to relay the orders. The fleet shifted, smaller vessels breaking off to chase the retreating Thorn and Vi ships, while the Dauntless maintained its position over the stations. The cleanup was brutal and efficient. Human forces swept through the abandoned positions, eradicating the remaining enemy presence and securing what remained of the stations. On the bridge of the Dauntless, Admiral Vol Kalen activated the secure channel. Admiral Hausman, this is Kalen. The stations are secured. Enemy forces have been eliminated. Hausman's voice came through immediately, steady and composed. Great. Come join us at the party, Admiral. This is going to be fun. At the same time, the remnants of the Thorn fleet tore through hyperspace, leaving behind a trail of debris and humiliation. Their battered ships, once symbols of galactic dominance, now limped toward Almaris, the last bastion of Thorn power. On board his flagship, Errol prowled the command deck. His golden scales dulled with frustration and rage, each clawed step echoed sharply against the cold metallic floor as his piercing gaze scanned the tactical displays. Cowards, Errol snarled, his fist crashing onto the console with a force that sent cracks spidering across its surface. Fleeing like prey before predators. Humans. Insignificant. Primitive. How dare they humiliate us? His bridge crew remained silent, their postures tense as they focused on coordinating the retreat. None dared to interrupt their leader's tirade. The galaxy's most feared empire was now reduced to this, scattered and broken, forced to regroup at their sacred homeworld. Errol's voice dropped to a growl, his anger now sharpened into resolve. They will come. I can feel it. We will crush them here on the doorstep of Almaris. Ready the planetary defenses. Alert every remaining fleet. This ends with humanity's annihilation. But despite his bluster, Errol's confidence was a facade. The Thorn forces were fractured, their allies gone, and the humans, unpredictable and relentless, had outmaneuvered them at every turn. The name Almaris, once a symbol of Thorn invincibility, now carried the weight of desperation. Not far from Almaris, in the vast expanse of space, the colossal human fleet moved with deliberate precision. Its silence was heavy with anticipation. Ships emerged from hyperspace one after another, their enormous forms assembling into a formidable armada. At the fleet's core were the Leviathan-class battleships, their massive frames radiating power and purpose. The Medusa and the Dauntless flanked the formation like sentinels, their weapon systems faintly aglow, ready for action. As the last ships materialized from hyperspace, the void around them twisted and bent, stars elongating into brilliant streams of light. The Leviathans stood at the vanguard, their immense forms anchoring the fleet's presence. On board, the tension was palpable. Every officer and crew member was keenly aware of the challenges that awaited. The blackness above Almaris cracked open as the human fleet erupted from hyperspace, a calculated wave of overwhelming force. At its head loomed the Zeus, the largest and most formidable of the Leviathan-class battleships. Its angular frame reflected the faint glow of the distant star, its weaponry poised for decisive action. The Thorn forces, caught in disarray, scrambled as alarms shrieked across their fleet. By the time their sensors registered the threat, the sheer scale of humanity's armada had already filled the heavens. The Zeus led the charge, its immense bulk overshadowing the disorganized Thorn dreadnoughts. Flanking it, the Medusa and the Dauntless commanded their own divisions with precision, smaller human ships forming a seamless web of coordination in their wake. On board his flagship, Errol stood frozen, his claws digging into the edge of the command console. His golden scales seemed to dull under the harsh light of the displays showing the human fleet's terrifying size. A cold shiver rippled through the Thorn Bridge crew as they awaited orders, their dread palpable. "Impossible," Errol growled, his voice low and venomous. "How did they?" He shook off the disbelief and slammed his fist onto the console. "Ready all ships. Fire everything we have. They die here on Almaris?" The bridge crew scrambled to obey, their movements frantic. But it was too late. On the bridge of the Zeus, Admiral Ian Hossman stood calm, his hands clasped behind his back as he observed the tactical display. The Thorn fleet was highlighted in red, a scattered, disorganized mass attempting to rally. Hossman stepped forward, his voice resonating across the command deck. "All units commence the attack. Obliterate these cowards." The order rippled through the human fleet like a surge of electricity. The Zeus surged ahead, its massive cannons glowing as they charged. Within seconds, a searing volley of kinetic rounds and plasma beams erupted from its hull, carving through the void toward the Thorn fleet. The other Leviathans followed suit, their combined firepower transforming the blackness of space into a storm of destruction. The Medusa flanked the formation, unleashing its railguns on a cluster of Thorn destroyers. The rounds tore through their shields and hulls with devastating precision, each hit igniting explosions that lit up the battlefield. Human forces advanced with relentless coordination, their tactics cutting through the enemy's disarray like a blade. The Dauntless on the opposite flank led a squadron of smaller human ships, their coordinated strikes ripping apart any Thorn vessels that dared to approach. Errol watched in horror as his fleet disintegrated. The human assault was merciless, their weapons cutting through Thorn ships as if they were paper. Even the mighty Thorn dreadnoughts, symbols of their dominance, crumbled under the Leviathan's onslaught. "Regroup," Errol roared, slamming his fist against the console again. "Focus fire on their lead ship. Destroy the Zeus. Show them Thorn's superiority." But his commands were futile. The Thorn fleet was in chaos, their communication still crippled by the human sabotage. The Zeus, impervious to the desperate attacks directed at it, continued its advance. Its main cannon fired again, the beam slicing through the largest Thorn dreadnought. The ship exploded in a blinding burst, its shattered remains scattering across the battlefield. On the ground below, Thorn troops and civilians alike stared up at the sky, their faces reflecting the fiery carnage above. The symbols of their empire, once indomitable, were being systematically annihilated. Admiral Hussman's voice remained steady as he issued his final commands. "Bring the formation tighter. Sweep the area. Leave nothing intact." The human fleet moved with mechanical precision, their tactics flawless. The smaller ships swarmed like wasps, targeting weakened Thorn vessels and finishing them off with brutal efficiency. The Medusa and Dauntless continued their assault, their weapons never relenting. Within minutes, the Thorn fleet was reduced to scattered wreckage, the once proud ships now lifeless husks drifting in the void. Errol's flagship remained, surrounded by debris and flames. Inside, Errol stood alone, his crew either dead or incapacitated. His sharp breaths filled the silence as he stared at the tactical display, the human fleet now surrounding Alaris, their dominance absolute. On the Zeus, Hussman turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the Thorn flagship." A moment later, Errol's image flickered onto the main display. His golden scales were charred, his crest drooping with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with hatred. Hussman's gaze was cold and his voice razor-sharp. "This ends now. You wanted war, Errol. You have it. And you lost?" Errol snarled, his claws digging into the edge of the console. "Human scum. You think this changes anything? You will burn." Hussman cut him off. "Enough." His tone was sharp, unyielding. "You've manipulated the council, slaughtered civilians, and brought war to our doorstep. Humanity will never forget this. But we are not here to conquer or to kill your people. We are here to end you." Errol's image flickered and disappeared as the transmission ended. The bridge of the Zeus was silent for a brief moment before Hussman turned to his officers. Prepare a strike team. I want Errol alive. Within minutes, a squad of human marines clad in advanced exosuits boarded a stealth dropship and launched toward the crippled Thorn flagship. The ship, surrounded by wreckage and fires from the battle, offered little resistance as the marines breached its hull. Explosions rippled through the corridors and the Thorn crew, already demoralized, barely managed a defense. The marines advanced with ruthless precision, their movements methodical. Plasma bolts ricocheted off their shields as they closed in on the command deck. Errol, claws raised, stood at the center of the room, his eyes blazing with defiance. His remaining officers formed a desperate last stand around him, but it was futile. Stand down, Errol, the lead marine barked, his weapon trained on the Thorn leader. Errol snarled, his crest rising in a final act of defiance. You think you can take me alive, human? His voice dripped with venom. You don't have a choice, the marine replied coldly. He signaled his team and within seconds, Errol was subdued, his claws bound in reinforced restraints. His officers followed, forced to kneel under the watchful aim of the marines' rifles. The team withdrew quickly, carrying Errol and his officers aboard their dropship. Behind them, time charges detonated, consuming the Thorn flagship in a cascade of flames and debris. By the time the Zeus registered the explosion, the dropship had docked, and Errol was secured in a reinforced containment cell. Hussman stood at the viewport, his gaze fixed on the fading wreckage of Errol's once mighty vessel. Is he secure? He asked without turning. Yes, Admiral, came the reply from his security chief. We have him and his officers shackled. Hussman nodded. Good. Prepare the fleet for departure. The human fleet began to move, their formation tightening as they left the ruins of the Thorn forces behind. On the surface of Almaris, the defeated Thorn looked skyward, their empire reduced to ashes in mere hours. Their leader Errol was gone, captured by the very species he had sought to annihilate. Before the Zeus entered hyperspace, Hussman gave one final command. Open a transmission to the Council. The holographic feed connected, broadcasting his image to the galaxy. Hussman stood tall, his expression enigmatic. To the Galactic Council, he began, his voice calm but firm. Let this serve as a warning. Humanity will not tolerate lies, oppression, or manipulation. We will deliver Errol, the instigator of this war, to face justice under the laws of the Council. Let this be the end of such deceit and violence, for all our sakes. His voice sharpened as he delivered his final words. But make no mistake, I speak on behalf of humanity when I say that if you choose to target us again, know that our response will not be just a threat. The transmission ended, and the fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving the galaxy to reckon with the determined force and justice of humanity.